Well, what a pleasure to be here for the 171st Capstone defense of the MCM program. Very pleased to be here to welcome everyone, and in particular our MCM candidate Josée Thibault, who is defending today. Her Capstone supervisor is Professor Dave Scholz, who is here, and her second reader for today will be Dr. Terry Flynn, who is stepping in for Professor. Well, for the person who usually is supposed to do that, right? For Professor Bradhorn, so we're very pleased to have this opportunity to get together. This is our third capstone today, actually, so it's been quite a busy day of capstones. So today's run of show is very straightforward. For those of you who've been here throughout the morning, you know what I'm about to say. Our MCM candidate Josée will have 25 minutes roughly. If you go over or under, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. We're not sticky about it. To present her research findings from her capstone paper. And after that, there'll be a first round of questions. Her supervisor, Professor Scholz, will go first. Second reader, Dr. Flynn, will go second. I have the option to ask a question as chair if I choose to. After that, or make an editorial comment. After that, we will go to a second round where her supervisor and second reader have another chance to ask her questions. Once that is completed, the gallery is invited to comment, critique, or ask a question of the candidate. We've had a very quiet gallery up today, which is very unusual. So I encourage our gallery to think of a question while Josée is presenting, because it's always a pleasure to have a question from the gallery. All right, without further ado, we're now at 12:03, so you have until, I don't know, 12:29 to present, and the floor is yours, Josée.
Thank you so much, Alex. I really appreciate it. And let's make sure that you can see my screen, which should be an audience window of my presentation. Excellent. Let's get started. I'm happy to share this research study with you, which was truly a pleasure to conduct on the topic of purpose-driven leadership. This is an evolving movement. It's a new leadership practice and therefore a growing field of study. We'll go through all of the main sections of the study, but I'll spend most of my time on results and insights, particularly given our time constraints. But I do welcome a deeper engagement on any of these points, and thank you, Dr. Sevigny, for encouraging participation. I welcome it. A little bit of context, social purpose is the why of an organization. It rests on the belief that business in this capitalist context can and should exist to make our world better. And certainly the issues that we experience today, which often feel so intractable, are not challenges that can be solved in isolation or independent, certainly of one of the primary ways that our society is organized. So in that context, my research problem is as stated as new purpose-driven corporate models emerge. How and to what extent do CEO leadership and communication styles contribute to the success of their company? And from that research problem emerges three questions. How do CEOs define and value purpose-driven leadership? Where might there be gaps? And what is the role of symmetrical communication in disseminating a corporate purpose agenda? Some review of key concepts. What is a purpose-driven corporation? It is one that experiences profit and social impact as mutually reinforcing goals. It is where stakeholders are mobilized rather than ignored or placated or even managed. And it's often expressed as you hear this often, a triple bottom line of people, profit, and planet. It's increasingly shown to attract top talent, to meet growing customer expectations, and to keep ahead of environmental risks, of social expectations, or of governmental regulation. It can also be really tricky. We live in what is often a reactive, polarized, definitely hyper-connected world. And as such, transparency and accountability are simply non-negotiable. You can also place the purpose-driven corporation in the context of the evolution of corporate social responsibility, or CSR, which itself is a reaction or a response to larger social movements. So CSR is generally understood to be birthed in the 50s, the early 50s, with the publishing of Social Responsibilities of the Businessman. It introduces the idea of the company giving back to society. In 1963, Milton Friedman's shareholder primacy ethos starts to take hold, and it posits that the corporation is accountable only to its shareholders and to profit maximization. As the social movements of the 1960s begin to dominate hearts and minds and sometimes profit, Friedman's stakeholder theory starts to add dimension to how businesses can and should be run effectively. And that encourages CSR to evolve beyond generosity and into sort of a more strategic position. That activity progresses and continues on to what in the 2000s is referred to as third generation CSR, just in time for the growing impacts of globalization, of climate change, and of course, a technical digital revolution. By 2015, you've got the Paris Accord, you've got UN SDGs that are launched, and both of those seismic movements make clear that business is as critical a lever as government or civil society to solve for climate and poverty crises. And then in 2018, you've got like a very expressed call for purpose-driven corporation from Larry Fink, who of course is the CEO of the world's largest asset manager, BlackRock. He writes an annual letter to his CEOs, and it's in 2018 that he starts to really speak about the importance of all businesses articulating a social purpose. Increasingly, and we see this resoundingly in research like the Edelman Trust Survey, business is seen as the most trustworthy lever for social change. And that puts the CEO in a significant position of influence. I'm leading here on the upper echelon theory and on integrative leadership models. And together, those form sort of the thesis that a CEO's moral imperative and actions are reflected in the company they lead. Of course, making authenticity particularly important. For examples of purpose-driven leadership, look no further than Canada's very own Michael McCain, CEO of Maple Leaf Foods, who has led with purpose, both in times of crisis, well documented, but also in times of plenty. And as I mentioned earlier, Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock. Pro-social employees, another comment that underpin the research, are the most prized employee. They're the most effective, most dedicated, and they can serve as very influential ambassadors for their company. These employees are drawn to and motivated by social impact, and they look for workplaces where they feel they can make a difference. Purpose-driven communication rests on the underlying principle that relationships, impact, and reputation hold equal currency to product or service. So communicators may see this as great news when you think about the eternal tension between communications and marketing. Purpose-driven communications borrows from excellence theory. It walks the line between strategic and authentic communication, and it is necessarily tied to execution. There can be no daylight between words and action. So I leveraged two methods to answer my research question: a general employee survey with a convenient sample and a set of 6 CEO interviews. A few notes for context: survey respondents needed to be employed by for-profit companies here in Canada. CEOs were invited through Mars Discovery District, an urban innovation hub with a social purpose of its own. And survey respondents were not tied to the organizations led by the CEOs interviewed, so more of a general sort of response. On the topic of how purpose-driven leadership is expressed, I learned that when it's done right, purpose underpins everything. It drives a strategic plan, it aligns stakeholders, it guides innovation, it informs the 4 Ps of marketing: price, product, place, promotion. It's also the centerpiece of the employee value proposition, and it's a direct expression of the CEO's personal sense of values and purpose. Over half of the survey respondents felt that they worked for a purpose-driven company. And of those, almost 3/4 felt that purpose was important to their company's success. Even more so, they felt it was personally important to them. When we look at gaps, CEOs were very clear-eyed that they were running a purpose-driven business, sure, but it's a business. Purpose can feed performance, profitability, customer satisfaction, but it must never undermine it. And I also learned that it's really hard work because the challenges of running a business are still there, right? Especially in terms of communication. People work remotely, companies grow, they retract. These factors, these headwinds are no different for purpose-driven companies than they are for any other type of company. When you ask employees about performance, you definitely see a gap, especially with those pro-social employees who likely have higher expectations. So 40%, 4 in 10 of those for whom purpose was highly important, felt that their company was delivering on that purpose. Interesting to note that the higher up the hierarchy you go, the more favorably employees rated their companies, which opens up lots of great new questions about how purpose is communicated. In terms of symmetrical communications, CEOs told me that, yes, they own the message. Yep, they are the key driver of purpose messaging, but it doesn't come alive until others speak that same language. Interestingly, the customer experience of purpose was less important to some than others. And in all instances, whether it drove messaging or didn't, they always thought of it as a job for marketing. And then finally, some CEOs felt that leading with purpose might not be right for all types of companies, right? Those who are more beholden to their shareholders or who are in different types of sectors and industries. Some felt that we were in a transition of leadership models. So, purpose might not be important now, but it certainly will be in the future. Regardless, all of the CEOs I spoke with felt that purpose-driven leadership was the only way for them to lead. It was such a personal expression of who they were. The importance of CEO leadership on the purpose agenda and the importance of that expressing itself in an authentic way was reflected in the employee survey. So 3/4 of respondents want to hear from their CEOs first and foremost. And when employees see their CEO as trustworthy and authentic, they see their company as strong performers on purpose. You'll see here in the graphics, there's another gap in leadership here, right? So while employers want to hear from their CEO, not everyone sees them as their most trustworthy and authentic communicator of purpose. Some insights that I felt were particularly interesting. It was really striking to me just how personal a sense of purpose was for the people that I spoke with. Their business is an expression of who they are in so many ways. And reflecting on the employee survey result, what a tremendous opportunity for matchmaking, right? Because those are the types of leaders that pro-social employees are really looking for. If purpose is only good for one thing, it earns its keep as an attractor, retainer, and motivator of talent. Again, another excellent leadership opportunity to celebrate and communication opportunity to celebrate and leverage pro-social employees as a manifestation of their company's purpose, because they really essentially become change makers in a lot of ways. Some of the leaders I spoke with were really disrupting an industry. One was in healthcare and one was in agriculture. And here, purpose can serve as a bit of a shield. If you're trying to revolutionize an industry or a product, if you're trying to change a system, it's significantly more powerful to talk about the reasons why you're doing it when those reasons are not purely profit. So by sharing your motivations for social good, it's your chance to reframe a debate and to address concerns more directly, more head on. You're essentially sort of defanging your detractors. Some companies are obviously purposeful because of the product or the service that they sell, but that's not the only way to manifest purpose in a company. How you run your business is just as important. Your commitment to equity, to fair wages and benefits, to employee development, to community engagement, how you choose, and then how you treat your customers, your suppliers, your investors, all of those decisions can be purposeful. It was interesting to me that some of the leaders I spoke with didn't necessarily see the value of purpose messaging with their customers if the product itself wasn't purpose driven. Again, another great opportunity for strategic communications with its multi-stakeholder perspective to close that loop, because we see in the research that it's increasingly important to customers. This was fascinating to me. I spoke with 4 men and 2 women. The men spoke of their purpose journey as a process of articulating what they've always felt deeply. The women spoke of a process of unlearning and of returning to their own values. They also spoke of purpose as a deep expression of maternal values and of caretaking. It was literal, and it was really evocative. So a really interesting snippet of a woman's journey through the ranks in the corporate sector, sort of adopting values that were counter to who they were, and then unlearning them in order to become more purpose-driven. Make no mistake, this embedding purpose is a whole lot easier if you build a company from the ground up as opposed to reverse engineering one. But there's a tricky part in the sense that you have to keep your purpose front and center through really significant challenges that are part of a startup environment, right? Your product, your investors, your staff, your investors. All of that can feel like it's in a constant state of flux. So keeping true to that original purpose can become really challenging. Also really interesting to see was how leaders or when leaders prioritize the employee experience and talk about their employees as their most significant intellectual property, how do they deal with layoffs then? And that's something that, particularly in a tech startup environment, particularly today in this economic environment, you can't avoid it. So again, when we talk about, they're a purpose-driven company, but they're a business. And it's also where symmetrical communication is so critical. And I heard from CEOs how proud they felt that laid off employees left with good feelings, still giving good Glassdoor ratings, on their way out the door, saying, thank you so much. I really appreciated and enjoyed my time here. But they also talked about how it kept them up at night. And how they really recognized that, these are people that you're saying goodbye to who have families to feed and lives to live. And they also spoke about how important it was to communicate with the employees who stay, and also how fragile that relationship can be, at least in the interim. I thought there was a really interesting study, really interesting insights, but it is important to remember that it was limited in scope and therefore perhaps applicability. Considering that this was a snowball sample and that the pool of CEOs was limited to Mars. So it really ended up being a study about tech founders and about employees who are Gen X or millennials, just in terms of who responded. It's also limited in sample size, so directional rather than decisive. But it opened up so many questions. And here are 4 that I'm personally really keenly interested in pursuing, particularly a case study on staff layoffs in purpose-driven companies, a case study on the role of purpose messaging with external stakeholders in the face of regulatory attention or intervention, something that one of my respondents is dealing with right now. And then the gender experience of purpose leadership is not really something that's discussed much, or maybe yet. So in conclusion, 3 main findings that I found particularly informative. Purpose leadership is at the intersection of personal calling and strategic advantage. It is a tool, but is also a real sort of heartfelt strategy. Strategic communications symmetrical model is uniquely positioned to support social purpose, particularly with that multi-stakeholder perspective. And finally, authenticity and transparency are non-negotiable. It only works if you really, really, really mean it. And I want to say thank you to certainly my Capstone advisor and to my mentors and to my family for making all of this possible.
Great, thank you very much for this concise and very informative presentation. I very much enjoyed it, actually. Without further ado, and because you were concise, it leaves more time for questions. So I will turn the floor over to your Capstone advisor, Professor Scholz, to kick us off.
Thanks, Alex, and excellent work, Josée. This the paper really highlights the importance of purpose leadership and how communications can go into that. So thank you for that. I want to go back and explore something a little bit further, because you talked about laid off employees. If you look at a pragmatic purpose leader, so because you can't just be about purpose, you still have to, I think one of the quotes from your respondents was, you have to keep the lights on.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you keep the lights on and move ahead in terms of purpose?
You have to fundamentally believe that the two are interconnected, for sure. Like you have to really, you have to be all in, and you have to be all in through the good times and the bad. And at the same time, you have to keep you have to have a long-term vision and understand. And one of the quotes I think is what, we really, really care, but maybe we over-rotated. And then another CEO talked about how, we have to feed the company because the company feeds us. So there's definitely the importance of understanding the interrelation between purpose and profit. It's not one over the other, it's them moving together. And that's where communications becomes really, really important, right? Like you still need to be very clear with your staff that we're running a business here. It's a good one, and it's one that really cares. And we're going to do our best so that you are fully actualized, self-actualized, so that we can continue to grow together and have an impact. And the only way we can do that is by being profitable. So there are certain things that we need to take care of the business.
Yeah, and I guess for organizations that are not all in your hyper-connected world, as he talks about, it comes very clear when they start to look at profit over purpose, I guess.
Absolutely. They have to walk together. Once they're in balance, you either, lose the business or you lose trust. So They have to walk side by side.
So if I go back through, working in corporate social responsibility and all it's been called over the years, there was always this sense that it mattered doing good for society in some way. Is purpose the same way? Like, for example, I'm pretty sure Mike Lindell from My Pillows has a purpose-driven organization, which is all about putting Trump back into the White House. Is that also a purpose-driven organization, similar to what Larry Fink does at BlackRock? But yet completely disparate to overall, at least I guess my view of what society's proper roles are. But for some people, that is a good purpose for him to have. Is it no longer about overall societal good, or is it about good for segments of society when you're talking about purpose?
Or just how do you define social good, right? Who gets to define social good? Which is an excellent question and a bit of a tough one. And that would be a really interesting, no, okay. That would be a really interesting thing to study a little bit further, but certainly the principles that we talked about apply, right? Like, is Mike Lindell authentic in his belief? Yeah. Is it driving the customer experience? Probably. Is it driving the employee experience? Interesting question. And then you put it out into the market forces, right? And does that respond to consumer and regulatory demand. And I guess it's a little bit of a battle of the purposes. But that's the arena in which we play, right? We're in a capitalist, democratic environment, and that's where those topics are often debated.
Yeah. Do you think purpose leaders? I think I can answer this question as I'm saying it, but so I don't think purpose leaders actually think about coming up with the best purpose to increase their business. They think about, this is something I care about.
Absolutely. It is so tied to what they personally believe in. There was one person that I interviewed who was an emergency room doctor and started a business because he simply could not, sit by. And then there was one who really felt that human resources had a greater responsibility to the world, and so designed a tech system that really centered the employee experience. Like those kinds of things, they come from the inside.
Okay, thank you, Josée.
Yeah.
Terry?
Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Dave, for those. And thank you, Josée, for this well-written, well-researched paper. Congratulations on a good presentation as well. So you get a call from a CEO from a female-owned, female-led clothing manufacturer located in Ocala, Florida, who are a publicly traded company. They've just gone onto the stock market. They're innovative in what they use technology for, but also in design. They're an American manufacturer and company. They don't manufacture offshore, but they are under attack by the governor of the state of Florida and been called one of those woke companies because in the governor's mind, this is all just crap. How do you respond? How does your research then inform your response to that CEO?
Not directly. I wouldn't say that the research necessarily directly responds to that particular scenario. However, there are some hints, right? Like symmetrical communication is about welcoming, listening to, responding to a multitude of stakeholders. And purpose-driven leadership and communication is about staying true to your authentic purpose and the reason why you are. So those two things sort of might create a bit of a roadmap of listen, engage, but don't compromise who you are. And I did a little bit of, I had done sort of a preliminary research, and this isn't about this study exactly, but where we had interviewed some other CEOs in different types of sectors, and they really talked about that, right? Like you just have to listen, and you have to sometimes just particularly in an employee context, the act of listening, the act of showing empathy does not require you to change your mind, but it does create goodwill. So presumably, hopefully, even in Florida, California, there's that can work sort of at a more systemic level.
So the notion of purpose and ESG or CSR and social advocacy kind of gets confused in a lot of people's minds, but more so today in this political climate. And I think purpose in Canada is different. Dave and I have done research where Canadians see CSR and ESG and social advocacy differently than American consumers do, because American consumers believe that corporations have a social role to play. Not so much in Canada, because they believe that social issues in Canada really are the foundation of government. Government is responsible for solving social ills, not. But when the political climate gets to be like it is, and we're going someday have a federal election, it seems like the federal conservative leader is using a lot of the tropes that are been thrown up in Republican conversations. How do you differentiate between purpose, corporate purpose, organizational purpose, and political ideology?
I'll speak from my own kind of personal insights. I wouldn't say that the research necessarily answers that question. I think that in its truest expression, the commitment to make the world a better place using whatever tools you have, right? The business you run, the charity, your social movement, whatever tool you employ to make the world a better place should transcend political ideology. And so that's my easy answer. It's interesting what you say, and I'm treading carefully because I can't remember the exact definition, but U.S. and Canadian corporate law are a little bit different in that there's a shareholder primacy in the U.S. that is not perfectly reflected in Canadian law, right? Like there is a little bit of a social responsibility to the Canadian corporation that's sort of baked in a little bit that goes beyond purely shareholder primacy, which makes it really interesting when you think about, the values then and the expectations being more pronounced in the US than in Canada. Although we can also say that the trust in government, there's probably quite a bit of difference between Canada and the US. So then it almost becomes sort of a balancing act of, where one is so low, one necessarily becomes high, and are they in balance? So I think all of those things kind of come together.
That's all I have for now. Thanks, Alex.
Great, thanks, Terry. I actually have a comment on one thing I've observed is that leadership and management styles are changing and changing quickly along a couple of factors. One is a generational change, which sees leaders as coaches, facilitators, mentors, as well as obviously directing and commanding. So the type of leadership that you describe in your study is probably going to become a necessity, or at least I think it may be. But I thought I'd welcome your comment, your speculative comment on whether what you describe is an aspirational thing or whether it's going to become something you need to know.
Thanks for that comment, because I do see it as a little bit of as the wave of purpose-driven pro-social employees, right? These people become employees, then they become managers, then they become leaders, then they become business owners, they become purchasers, right? They become, a lot of people that I spoke with who weren't necessarily thinking about purpose in their customer relationship, you can imagine a future where that evolves, right? Where your pro-social employees all of a sudden is buying widgets at scale and is really curious if the people in their manufacturing, in their seller's manufacturing plant is paying people a fair wage. So I can imagine that becoming more and more of a matter of just a table stake in terms of managing, and certainly some of the CEOs I spoke to were like, if you don't want to be purpose driven, that's fine. You're a dinosaur. I'll eat your lunch. Good luck to you. So here's hoping.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's something to watch. How whether purpose-driven commerce is going to evaluate and also evolve, and also where, because in the West, that's certainly a trend, right? But is it a trend in the BRICS? It's a good question, So anyhow, any further questions, Terry or Dave?
Yeah, I have one more. What are you going to do with this piece of research? I mean, you work with a lot of purpose-driven organizations. How are you going to mobilize this, or are you going to do anything with this post today?
I am nothing if not ambitious, Dave. So I would love to explore possibly publishing this work in different types of ways. I think that each of the key insights are in and of themselves an interesting sort of article that I'd love to share on social media. I'll be hosting a lunch and learn and in my own place of work, just because it is so sort of closely tied. I also sit on the steering committee for the Purpose Economy Project and on Imagine Canada's steering committee to revamp the caring communities program. So that research will inform certainly my contributions in those spaces. So my plan is to publish it personally through my LinkedIn, to publish it professionally through where I serve and where I work, and to explore any avenues, both for further research, but also contribution in an academic context.
Thank you,
Josée. So if you are going to do that, one area of research I'd suggest that you look into to add is Melissa Dodd's work on corporate social advocacy. And then where she just presented an update. This is an area of research that she founded probably about 10 years ago, and lots of students are graduate students and PhD students in the United States are really testing this as well, because it takes it beyond CSR and ESG and really puts organizations right on the front lines of advocating. And again, mostly US-based research, so you have to kind of take it in the consideration of the context and the political climate that's happening there. But I would suggest that you look there. And I know that you looked at Mars-related organizations, so technology innovation sort of style organizations. Aside from Maple Leaf Foods, can you point to some other Canadian purpose-driven companies that come to mind?
Yeah, lots. But I'll give one example that I had interviewed and researched for a student paper, and to me it was just such a great articulation of how do you take a growing company and sort of reverse engineer. If you're literally selling wood, how do you reverse engineer that? And they spoke very eloquently and compellingly about the importance of the employee experience. This was a family-owned company. I don't think it's a secret. They're called Matree, and they sell wood. Like, it's not necessarily what you would imagine as a purpose-driven company, but if their brand is about turning houses into home, then their purpose is to make sure that those homes are filled with employees and that feel like they're truly a part of a family in both a corporate and in their own lives. And it's so a big commitment to diversity, a big commitment to sharing bounty, a big commitment to employee growth, and then layering on as they sort of define their purpose, really thinking about the planet is also our home, and our relationships with suppliers and vendors are also part of our extended family. So how do we sort of continue to articulate that purpose with all of our stakeholders? So that's one that I can point to that's been really interesting in terms of reverse engineering what may not feel like a perfect candidate for purpose.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's all I have, Dave and Alex.
Okay.
Great, thanks. So now we turn to the gallery. Do we have any questions? I see Josée has a question. All right, we have a question today.
Let's see. Can you hear me? Hi,
Yes.
Josée. Every time I heard the name Josée, I kind of like, talk to me.
Feel the pressure to present,
true, It's a true pleasure to be here today and listen to this really amazing study. Really resonates with me in the space that I'm working in right now as well. You know, purpose over profit, decarbonization, climate. You can bring this, I'm thinking in my world right now, but taking it actually a little further, my question is actually just a really easy one. You did 6 interviews and you mentioned the big gender difference. And I just want to go back to that and understand a bit more. How many of the 6 were men and how many were women of your interviewees?
4 and 2, 4 men, 2 women. So really, really interesting, really clear, but really shallow in terms of, you know, the applicability. Like, I don't know if this is a true reflection, but whoa, was it ever striking and clear in speaking with them, just the difference and a difference in expression, right? It wasn't that the male CEOs that I spoke with weren't purpose driven. They really were, but there was a use of language and that process of unlearning that was so. There was just a clear line between those 4 and those 2.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a stream of questions. Let's go to Christina and then Brian.
Sorry, it takes a while to unclick all my buttons here. Well done, Josée. I was curious about your findings that the buy-in in employees tends to be in the higher up levels and not so much the lower levels, which is generally the bigger number of employees and also the ones that will have most interface with other stakeholders and staff. So I was wondering if you were able to prod that any further and see if there's any learnings on how you would get that message to filter down to the end rank employees.
Yeah. So one of the CEOs I spoke to was like, it's really in terms of alignment, right? When you think about alignment and cascading information down, how do you make sure that the person who's moving, you know, paper from pile A to pile B, like, how do you feel like this contributes to that larger purpose, right? Like, if you're doing data entry, what does that have to do with making the world a better place? So I think it's about rolling it, like cascading down that, this is a little bit cheesy, but I can't even remember who said it, but there's this great quote about, like, you know, like social movements are identified and recognized by its leaders, but it's the administrators that make it work, right? It's the people on the phone who are calling, and it's the people who are printing the flyers and distributing them. Those are the ones that are really sort of making a social movement come alive. And I think that idea can sort of translate a little bit in the sense that every cog, this is a terrible thing, or it's not a very purposeful way to talk about employees, but every cog in a machine makes the machine work, right? So I think articulating that, making sure that people really feel like they belong to something greater, celebrating the successes up and down, across and all around becomes really, really important. Brian,
you're up.
Sorry, just like Christina, I had to click a bunch of buttons. Josée, I wanted to pull on the same thread that Josée did. Actually, I thought that insight was really fascinating. The dichotomy of opinions, you know, and relating that to maternal instinct or maternal themes. I'm wondering if you came across any research that, you know, looked at that dynamic, but also I think, you know, I'm wondering if there's a dichotomy with, you know, parents and non-parents, you know, people who are, you know, in a CEO leadership type position and understand, you know, what goes into raising a family and maybe have perhaps a more empathetic, you know, disposition or not. I don't know. I don't want to suggest that that's a dynamic that exists, but I'm wondering if you came across any research that would maybe, you know, talk about that.
I didn't. And I'm dying to learn more about it because it is so fast. It was so fascinating to me. I'll say that, and even when you think about purpose leaders, right? You think of Michael McCain, you think of Larry Fink, like you're thinking of men. And I know that some of the leaders that I spoke with were parents, right? Even the men have kids. So it's just such an interesting avenue to explore a little bit further. How does the act of being a parent inform your leadership, whether you're a man or a woman? And how does the act of caretaking kind of translate as well? It's really, really fascinating. I'll admit, like, I wasn't necessarily looking for that kind of research, because it really just kind of, it evolved, and it was an insight that popped up, but I think it's really fascinating.
Great, thank you. Well, we have time for two more questions. So we'll go to Allison and then Lindsay.
Hi, thank you very much, and congratulations, Josée. I know this has been a lot of work for you. So I've been watching CSR trends for a long time, and over the years we've had these inflection points where things like B Corps have popped up, right? And now the latest thing is around purpose and understanding the purpose of the corporation. In your research, do you have a sense of what the inflection point could be? Like, we've been stuck, right? We hit these great trends, but we get stuck. So do you have a sense of what an inflection point could be to push this purpose movement more into the mainstream? So addressing barriers and the role of communications in that.
It's really cute that you mentioned how B Corps just popped up, since you were such a big driver of why B Corps exist in Canada. So thanks. But do I have thoughts? I think that I don't think you can underestimate the power of the disruption that the pandemic was. I think it really caused people to just really think about what was important to them. And in fact, there were some of the leaders who were like, you know what, I've always been a purpose-driven leader, but it was when I was sitting alone in my office at home where I really spent some time articulating it. Like, you're just really, it's a time of self-reflection, right? And I think between that, what was a real war for talent, and needing to really adjust, and now granted there may be a recession looming, so that might be a little bit of a back and forth, but I do think that helped move it along. And then I think I don't know how much more looming the climate crisis can be, but here we are, right? So I think those three things together, a younger cohort of employees or a younger generation of employees going, you know what, I'm good. Unless you make it worth my while, unless it's really meaningful to me, I've got other things that I can do. Mixed with the pressures of climate, and mixed with the 2 years of deep introspection, I think that might be an interesting sort of confluence of events.
Yeah, those are fascinating. I think those are all terrific. And then the final thing I would say to think about is the opportunity presented by the intergenerational transfer of wealth, and what that means from impact investing and sort of kicking all of those things into space as these corporates have access to new forms of financing they wouldn't have had before. So yeah, I think that was great. Thank you very much.
Excellent point. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to our final question from Lindsay.
Hi, Josée. Nice to meet you. My question really is in the people that you interviewed or the organizations that you talked to, did you come across anyone who was able to do this kind of listening at scale? So we think about, it's really important, right, to be listening to stakeholders. I think we all agree about that, but what purpose often means, or finding out what purpose means, is tied to perception. And so were there organizations that successfully were listening at scale across all their stakeholder groups, making meaning out of that, and then taking intentional action with what they were hearing?
No, I haven't. And that's so interesting, because there was a lot of talk about strategic planning, the executive kind of coming together and really sort of thinking about it. There was a lot of, it comes from me, it's me out. And there's a lot of engagement. Some had written books, some had, go on the circuit, the podcast circuit, but in terms of social listening at scale, and granted too, sorry, that a lot of these organizations are still growing, right? So they're not necessarily at a size where their customers or their staff complement would require tools at scale. However, when you're thinking about growth, it's certainly it's not a bad idea to get a really good sense of what's important to people and where does it fit and connect into your own sort of personal expression of purpose and purpose agenda. So that's a really interesting little opportunity there.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of put you on to an area to explore. I mean, my capstone research was in the area of experience management. And so there are organizations, there are tech companies now that are offering that opportunity to organizations to align purpose with how we monitor that at scale for the organization. And so there's a very close link there, because we're talking about, at the end of the day, human beings who have very different perceptions on things. So
what an interesting opportunity for collaboration, Lindsay. Call me anytime.
absolutely, Josée. Thank you very much for your research.
Of course.